We are in the post-World War II period, a time in which modern art gained institutional acceptance. In the first half of the 20th century, we see formalist art involved with non-representation, abstract forms, the purity of the medium, painting and sculpture, and abstract expressionism that appears with artists that became very successful, like Jackson Pollock, with his gestural paintings as being one of the main figures. This modern art was impactful. It had all the visual contents that were the ideals of that time, to be creative, innovative. On the one hand, this time brought an economic revival, which many supported.
At 1,200,000. With Marina at 1,200,000. David, give me 3. Excuse me? What are we saying? He's not bidding. Okay, so was it, David, 1,000,001 with you? Okay. Yes, it was. It was 1,000,001. It's your bid, right? Yep. 1,000,001. Do you want to take 50? No? It's here at 1,000,001 and against you, Nick, too. On the further telephone, David, it's your bid. At
But on the other hand, there were
50,
those who questioned this reality.
It was leaving the morphological formalist basis for art and focusing on this aspect of signification. It was the importance of the object that we managed to dispense with. It's the intellectuals, the writers, the artists who do intellectual work, who are committed to long-term views of society. We are the stable force in society, not the other ones who want to present us so often as irrational.
I thought so.
I think we have a certain built-in mission to being an artist now, which is very much to resist corporate culture. So we have to struggle against a market that wants to provide the meaning, where it's been always our job to fight for the meaning of our work.
I take it that one problem we share is how to hold on to the historical specificity that the managerial knowledge culture tends to dissuade and to erase, without rendering incident picturesque, transparent, and conscriptable.
The late 60s were politically and socially volatile times in Europe and the United States. Dissatisfaction with the Vietnam War, societal values, and political structures was building, particularly in the universities.
Many artists had these same critical views towards consumption, so they sought different and very radical ways to make art. Filmmaker Guy Debord, who was very influential in experimental film, his film Society of the Spectacle includes clips from various sources. He also reads his own writing.
Toute la vie des sociétés dans lesquelles règnent les conditions modernes de production s'annonce comme une immense accumulation de spectacles. C'est le reflet fidèle de la production des choses et l'objectivation infidèle des producteurs. Là où le monde réel se change en simples images, les simples images deviennent des êtres réels et les motivations efficientes d'un comportement hypnotique.
What a foreshadowing Debord's ideas on the spectacle society is when we look at our present-day lives engulfed behind monitors of every sort.
À mesure que la nécessité se trouve socialement rêvée, le rêve devient nécessaire. Le spectacle est le mauvais rêve de la société moderne enchaînée, qui n'exprime finalement que son désir de dormir. Le spectacle est le gardien de ce sommeil.
What's so striking about Debord's films is that they are essentially a fabric of citations, both on the soundtrack, which consists primarily of phrases, sometimes extended phrases taken from a variety of sources, everything from Marx, Nietzsche, Hegel, to commercials, law codes, newspaper articles, etc., combined with images that themselves are also citations from films, from newspapers, from books, from the history of cinema.
Guy Debord was part of the situationists. They wanted to disrupt the flow through actions in the street and through this film and different art productions. Those were situations of crisis in the confrontation between the status quo and their actions. But they weren't the first. The first use of performance as art were a group of artists in Japan called the Gutai. The Gutai artists had seen Jackson Pollock and his action paintings and the way that he was filmed, moving about. Jackson Pollock had quite possibly been inspired by the Japanese splash painting, and the Gutai artists, they started to create these actions that were spontaneous, that were unrehearsed, that left chance in, considering the process of making as the artwork itself. Having direct contact with experience is like an explosion of creativity because they questioned what an artwork could be. And this in other disciplines, let's see in music. John Cage introduces something that hadn't been considered before.
Well, I promise you, this is the piece everyone here tonight has come to experience. There really is nothing like John Cage's 4 minutes, 33 seconds.
Silence. Not the notes, not the musical notes, but the spaces in between. And the interesting thing is, there's always something. And so in this concert, there's only the instruction where the musician is supposed to change the pages to continue a reading, but it's a continuing of the reading of silence. And the audience in the room gets to listen to all the sounds that are occurring and the sounds that they themselves are making. It's this very new form of music that is heard, but it's also a spatial matter, because if you speak out loud in a room, you might hear yourself with a different echo. The architecture itself creates a new instrument.
Well, that's one of the most extraordinary performances I've ever experienced here in the Barbican Hall. 4 minutes and 33 seconds by John Cage. And by the way, those of you with stopwatches, and there are many of you out there, I know, 4 minutes and 33 is the amount of performance time we heard. There was, of course, time between the movements as well for everybody to cough. I've still got Tom Service.
One asks, who are the performers? Is this music? Everything blurs. The divisions between stage and audience. artistic disciplines and other disciplines. What is the artwork and what is not the artwork becomes so blurry.
As a philosophy student, he's also in a post-war situation in the 50s in America. He would be against metaphor because he would understand instantly, I think, that metaphor could not in any way be a vehicle of meaning after the Holocaust and the dropping of the atom bombs. That metaphor had been called into serious question and serious doubt, and that he had to find a way to make art that could exist on its own terms without the support of metaphor, one might say, without the scaffolding of metaphor.
For Don, the exhibitions shouldn't be about anything. They should be ways to experience the art. Don was trying to make artworks that dealt with themselves and existed for themselves and didn't rely on past histories or narratives or myths to be what they were. And part of the myths he was trying to get rid of, or the narrative, or the fetishizing, was the handiwork of the artist. So he started out as a painter, and his interest in surfaces and colors remained constant throughout his life. But one of the limitations he set for himself was that the color must be intrinsic to the material. And that's why, for instance, to use plywood and aluminum and acrylic sheets is because the color was in it and it wasn't applied. This was not a reaction to anything, but his way of exploring his main interests, which were space and color. He discovered that if he brought the artworks off the wall with enough depth, they weren't paintings, they weren't reliefs, they were something new. And these works, which follow a progression of space and volume, space, volume, space, volume, with a reversing of both, was his way of organizing the space in a self-evident way. So it might magnify light, it might magnify volume and space and color. It never contradicted what was known about those things or what they did. And in fact, they enhance your awareness of those things. One of the things about Don's artwork is that he's always breaking his own rules to explore more. And for him, it was very important that the artwork not contradict knowledge, but also that means you have to keep gaining knowledge. So it's not a minimalism, it's more of a maximalism, and getting rid of the things that are not required for art and not interesting in art.
The Earth's history seems at times like a story recorded in a book, each page of which is torn into small pieces. Many of the pages and some of the pieces of each page are missing. Thence north, 60 degrees, west, 651 feet. Thence north, 45 degrees, east, 651 feet. Thence southeasterly along the meander line, 675 feet to the point of beginning, containing 10 acres, more or less. North of the loosened cutoff, the water is a red or pink color due to algae in the brine. The crystal step will actually wind itself into a spiral during growth. At the steady state, the spiral will appear to rotate. The right and the left-handed dislocations give rise to clockwise and anti-clockwise spirals. South by west, mud, salt crystals, rocks, water. Southwest by south, mud, salt crystals, rocks, water. Southwest by west, mud, salt crystals, rocks, water. West by south, mud, salt crystals, rocks, water. West, mud, salt crystals, rocks, water. West by north, mud, salt crystals, rocks, water. Northwest by west, mud, salt crystals, rocks, water. Northwest by north, mud, salt crystals, rocks, water. North by west, mud, salt crystals, rocks, water.
All your sensual experience has been organized by language. In the beginning there is the word, somebody once said. Either you deal with language critically through the front door, or it comes in uncritically through the back door. And I felt it was better to make work about language to overcome language. When I first did the neons, for example, there was the history of neon in advertising. I had to subvert the commercial dimension of it as a cultural object, but also I was constructing tautologies. I wanted to make works which talked about themselves. Neon had a lot of qualities I could unpack.
An art language was something with a fairly complicated origin. I'd been writing or producing these sort of strange little textual fragments for some time. Terry and I, and to a certain extent also Harold Hurrell and Dave Bainbridge, thought we'd produce this little journal. And out of that grew a conversation with various other artists in America and other parts of the world. We used to write about and occasionally mention what we called an emergency conditional, that conceptual art is theory just in case it's art, and it's art just in case it's theory, and they work just in case. But whether the theory was a theory of art or a theory of something else, some philosophical theory or semantic theory or psychological theory or historical theory or something, it could look into other areas which were not necessarily thought appropriate for art to look.
For our part, we look to modes of critical negation and provocation that sit competently but uneasily between different institutional spaces, never presenting a complete face to either, but holding out a prospect of conversation in both, one in which a dark history is indeed remembered, and the prospect of an even darker incursion continually held in view.
He works with a stopwatch. The reason that he does this is because these sounds are in no sense accidental in their sequence. They each must fall mathematically at a precise point, so he watches his watch as he works. He takes it seriously. I think it's interesting. If you are amused, you may laugh. If you like it, you may buy the recordings. John Cage and Water Walk.
These different ways of making art might seem very distinct, each one with their own characteristics, but there is really a lot of overlayering. For instance, when you look at land art, there is a performative aspect to it that is sometimes part of the work itself. The spiral jetty is a complex conceptual work. Its site specificity, large scale, and symbolic spiral form require the viewer to consider geological time, entropic transformations of landscape and of human history. And so art, with these changes, becomes wide open. Anything that can be perceived through the senses can be a material for making art. That wide range is going to be the operating field for contemporary art still being explored today.